Okay, thanks everyone for coming. Hope my voice is good enough. Has a bit of a problem, but hopefully it's good enough for this session. How many of you have heard of Kamailio? Okay, so everyone. Then how many of you can pronounce it properly? Okay. Then you will have to go to Mr. Fred Posner's talk, which is after me. Somehow he does it a bit better from this point of view, how everything could be pronounced and more like introductory. I'm more like technical, and this presentation will give you a bit more in-depth information about config file and what you can use. First, I want to give a bit of a background with the project as well as about myself. So I'm originally from Romania, being a computer science engineer and working in the VoIP real-time communication since January 2002 when I joined a research institute in Berlin, Germany. It's the place where actually all the story with this project started. The initial name or the initial project was SIP Express Router. How many of you have heard of SIP Express Router? Okay, so quite a lot of old people around. So for a couple of years, I was a researcher there. We were doing quite good work with ITF on implementing like a reference for the SIP initiation protocol, which was under development as a specs. The project got quite popular. It's actually still the only one, or the foundation of what you can see out there as SIP proxy architecture. So being now Kamailio, and I will clarify it a bit with this name as well. So the institute at some point sold the IPR of the project to Tekelec, which was a US company at that time, which later, like 4 years ago or so, was acquired by Oracle. Because of that, a lot of researchers went to Tekelec to work as employees there. A couple of us wanted to continue with the project. It was already open source. But there was a bit of a conflict with the institute. They couldn't really continue on the same way with the project as it was before. They use it for writing IMS extension and still using it for their research project, but they couldn't continue as managing it and developing as a mainstream force behind. So a couple of us decided to go or leave the institute and started to do consultancy and continue with the open source. And we created OpenSCR, which quickly became like the main branch of the project, like the one where the community was gathering and most of the new features were happening. The guys from Tekelec and some other few companies continue with SIP Express Router on the public branch as well. They were focusing more on like core routing and so on. We were focusing more on features. We, however, as OpenSCR, we got in another trouble in 2008 with a US company that claimed we infringed the trademark on SCR. They had an auto dialer, so not related to Oracle Tekelec set of companies. And as an open community, not really big company behind, we were many companies, we decided it's better to rename it rather than challenge the claim in court. Most of the developers at that time were in Europe, and coming to US to fight in court for a trademark didn't look like the right way to spend resources on. And you know, financial-wise, it's quite expensive in USA. So we decided to rename, and some of our developers from Austria at the end proposed Kamailio, which is a Hawaiian word. Is the verb for conversation, so having a conversation, so seemed like related to real-time communication. We checked quickly. There was only one street in Honolulu having that name, so we had a street named after this project, so we said, oh, sounds good. And the rest, like domains and the result on Google, were less than 20 entries. So sounded like a good option. Some of us didn't prefer to have like a generic name, like, I don't know, zip server or zip router, although we own like ziprouter.com domain and so on. So that's the moment when we rename it OpenSCR, and some fork happened like 2.5 weeks after that, if I'm not wrong. Anyhow, besides the OpenShift fork, what we did a couple of months later, we merged the source trees between OpenSCR and Kamailio. At that moment was already Kamailio with the SIP Express router branch from out there, because again, as I said, there are a couple of companies pushing some new code, especially on performances, and it's actually where we have all this asynchronous TCP and asynchronous TLS. We have it back from 2008 because they were focusing on high volume of traffic. We were, as I said, more on these kind of features like list code routing, load balancing, presence, and look like a good fit. And again, we were like colleagues before, like 3 years before, we were in the same room at the research institute. It just happened that TechElec was not making it clear their plans with the open source SIP Express router, and we had to do the OpenSCR fork. So from that moment, we continue on the same source tree with Kamailio and SIP Express router, and finally we decided to stick on the name Kamailio because we own now the trademark on it. It was not easier to find all the details behind the acquire of IPR by TechElec. So if they have some trademarks or some other tools that could enforce on us. So we decided that starting with version 4.0, which happened like 4 years ago, we don't package anymore two types of application. More or less, it was the same code, but some people prefer to still have like application name being SCR, and some people prefer to have it as Kamailio. So now it's Kamailio everywhere, and that would be like a short history. I'm one of the initial developers. We were like 5. 2 are still with TechElec Oracle. 1 is back in research at Columbia University in New York. Another one created the fork, and I'm the last one from the initial team, very active with Kamailio. So more or less leading the project these days. We have a booth down there, so if you want to see some demos or speak with a couple of us developers, I think we are here like 7 or 8 people that contribute code recently to Kamailio. Also, we are a group of companies at the same place, so there is one doing IMS, so if you are involved in voice over LTE, you can see what you can do with Kamailio in that regard. I'm kind of doing all sorts of consultancy. There is Alex Balashov that is focusing for North America, building, you have a dedicated or special dialing rules here and things like that. So we have there a lot of people that could give you insights about different use cases of Kamailio. Just to refresh everyone that maybe it's new to Kamailio and to understand the purpose of it. So we are a signaling SIP server. We don't handle media. So all RTP stuff that we can do is more like relaying it for the purpose of helping with NAT traversal or maybe quality of service, but we don't really interpret it. We don't look for the TMF, we don't do transcoding. There is an application, a helper application also developed by the developers from Kamailio called RTP Engine, which goes a bit more than just forwarding. It can do encryption, decryption from WebRTC endpoints like browsers to the classic SIP endpoints like normal SIP phones. So that's also from our project, and it's working very well with Kamailio. Otherwise, you can actually use it as a telephony platform if you want. You don't need any other application. If you just want to connect to phones and have a video or audio session, we support any kind of media. It's why I said video, audio, or if you invent like holograms, it's just working. We do signaling, like we locate endpoints. I want to call James. My phone is sending to Kamailio, where is James located, and then James' phone starts ringing. But we do a lot at that moment, because we need to see it's not that friendly scanner, so it's not an attack. We need to do authentication. We need to handle scalability. So this is no longer targeting small deployments, although you can use it. I use it for my big 3 members family. But the usual way would be like carriers or operators. For example, major contributors to the project, even these days, is the Second Telecom in Germany. They had a presentation at Kamailio World, the last edition at this year, and they advertised there that they run it for more than 11 million endpoints or something like that, phone numbers, and they contribute to Kamailio, the code. Then would be this, what I call edge signaling server, but people refer to it as SBC. I try to avoid SBC mainly because a lot of people associate ABC with what Acme Packet used to provide, and that was like a beast, could do transcoding, could do a lot more. So with those signaling, so we could like act as a mid-register, we can do like security firewall, we can normalize SIP headers, adding, removing, changing values there. So anything you want to do at the SIP level, we pretty much can do it. When it comes to media, we can relate with RTP engine and so on, but we don't do IVR, we don't do DTMF and things like that. So a popular use case would be in front of an asterisk or eventually other media server, free switch, or even Cisco gateways for the purpose of least code routing, for the purpose of load balancing, so scalability. If you have an existing platform, putting a proxy could add you value. Again, sometimes even you have a limit or a small number of endpoints, the traffic could be increased by all these friendly scanners running out there. So it's always good to look at this from the security point of view, not from the capacity point of view. So maybe even with a single asterisk, sometimes you sleep better at night by having a proxy in front of it and cutting all the SIP vicious crap or other tools out there. As an example, because again, I'm going a bit more and more in the technical, here will be like a load balancer, and that's a snippet from our configuration file, which is a bit atypical for what people expect in the telephony world, and we have it like that from 2001, 2002. It's a scripting language. And by that, practically, you have to look at Kamailio as a framework for building telephony platform or building real-time telephony systems. Kamailio doesn't do anything by default. So if it's doing something wrong, it's because you did something wrong in the config file in the scripting language. Our default behavior is drop everything. If you don't add there, I want to send this out, Kamailio will not send that out. If you don't add there, I want to authenticate this, Kamailio will not authenticate that. So we are, again, as a toolkit for building, we give you all kinds of authentication methods from username and password to APIs, keys to, of course, IP-based authorization and things like that. So that would be load balancer implementation using dispatcher module. Again, you don't really need to understand it, but to see that we have like if conditions, then we have execution of like functions with parameters, we have exit, we can execute subroutes and so on. So I had a couple of presentations at Astricon, and I was always saying the most important knowledge that you must have for understanding how Kamailio works would be first the SIP protocol. If you don't know the SIP protocol, you're gonna be a bit lost. It doesn't have to be like an expert of SIP, because this SIP for endpoints is SIP for servers, but how SIP is supposed to do routing, it's the most important. So understanding the headers that are relevant for routing, understanding the headers relevant for authentication, it's really important. And then you can get access to all these attributes of a SIP message, and you can mangle it as you want from Kamailio configuration file using this scripting language. Just as a summary of this year, practically we released Kamailio 5.0 is the latest stable release series. back in February. Again, we have a very large contribution team. It's like probably every year more than 50 people from different companies contributing code and new modules. And this will be a summary. You'll find the links there if you want to see more details about all these new modules and the scripting languages, which is part of this talk. It had a big, let's say, part in the latest release, like new features and what we wanted to add. Specifically, it was this, what we call now Kami framework. So that would be Kamailio embedded interface. So far we had that scripting language. It was self-designed back in 2001, 2002. Special purpose language for SIP routing, but then now is not only bare telephony. People want to integrate with social media. People want to integrate with the NoSQL server released yesterday and dismissed tomorrow eventually. And they need a bit more flexibility. They need more access to libraries. So is not always that optimal to start reinventing the wheel and writing a C module for each new system that you want to integrate with. So we are thinking at giving options, whether you want to use our native scripting language or if you want to use another language that is, let's say, more popular, has more extensions, it's maybe more documented in terms of the structure of the language and so on. So I have now, instead of using native language for writing the routing rules, you can use Lua or JavaScript or Python or Squirrel, which is a small scripting language, but has a quite nice documentation. It's sort of similar to Lua, maybe a bit more suitable for embedded devices because it's a smaller set. We have other interpreters. So for Perl, which was actually the first we had, but doesn't have this enhancement yet for the Kami interface. But we can also run .NET. We have an interpreter for the Mono project. For those that were looking at the project over the year, we also did a source code tree restructuring because we started to have a lot of modules and then different components, and we had a lot of source code files in the root folder. So we relocated that the root folder looks a bit more nicer and it's easier to spot where the sources for the application are, where the utilities and tools documentation config as a just quick spot. Now, back to SIP routing and a bit more flexibility that was required lately, again, in deciding what's the next hop for this call or this instant messaging or this presence. We offer, for quite some time, some routing API. So practically from our configuration file, you can interact with external system, like doing an HTTP query. You can give there like caller, callee, source IP. You can take whatever from the environment of that SIP request. You send it over via some transport, like HTTP, HTTPS, of course, or NetString. You can do it in a synchronous mode, like I send a request, I wait, or I park the invite in memory of Kamailio. I send a request, I handle other, like registration whatsoever. When I get a reply from the external system, I will resume the routing of that invite. And then, again, what we did with 5.0, it's flexible routing languages. So you have more data types because we used to have, or still have in the native config file scripting language, you have only integers and string values. Lua, Python support any kind of languages, also has structure, arrays, hash tables. We had some, like hash tables, but again, sometimes you want to do more than that. And a very, or quite demanded feature was hot reloading of the routing rules. So if you want to add a debug or you want to change, like adding another header, it required to edit the old config file and then restart Kamailio. That's not something that is really harming because Kamailio is just a proxy. Nobody notices apart, okay, if it's TLS, but TLS could be broken or TCP broken by other reasons. But for UDP, like endpoints will never notice anything when you restart Kamailio, and it's a very fast restart. However, there are situations when people prefer not to restart or would like not to restart. And with these new scripting languages, you have this option, and if you want, you can come tomorrow or today at the booth if you have time, and probably the dangerous demo will involve a bit this new feature. Eventually on an Ubuntu phone running Kamailio. So this is what we have now. Now in more details, so practically when you think about API-based routing, you will have to split your logic in two parts. Is like SIP standard handling, like receiving from the network, sending from the network, taking care of retransmission and whatever requires to send the request further, like adding a couple of headers or removing some headers, which are required by SIP standard. And this is what Kamailio can do very well. The business logic, it's where most of the people find limitation in the scripting language because they wanted to integrate with, I don't know, whatever system they have in-house, like an existing billing, self-written system, and so on. So that will be the business decision. And again, the output of the business decision is first, should I route this call out or just reject it because it's not a valid user, doesn't have credit, and so on. And if routing out, where? So it's very few information that actually needs to be fed back to Kamailio from this point of view. Of course, you can have various attributes along that, like how long I should try ringing the device, you know, putting a timeout for ringing and so on, setting some headers like caller ID and things like that. But in terms of SIP routing will be next hop address. And it's what you can do externally. What we have in Kamailio, it's very rare when you can find in Kamailio a single extension for a specific purpose because, again, it's open source. There is collaboration from different companies, different developers, and even for like least code routing, we have like 3 or 4 modules. So we have, again, sort of building blocks. You can do HTTP, RPC calls to external systems. Then you get the data back. You can choose your format. We support like XML or JSON, or it could be just bare text. Then for processing, again, you can do it asynchronous or synchronous. We have for asynchronous like async module, HTTP async client. So you just push the request and everything is done automatically, like park in the memory of Kamailio and resume when the response is received. Meanwhile, Kamailio handles any other traffic was received on the network. So we have all these modules like Event API, AV API, message queue, rtimer that you can combine to build your own logic, again, asynchronous or synchronous mode. We also have a module RT-JSON, and you will see it, which could be used as a format for feeding back data to Kamailio and setting some attributes in an easier way. As types of routing, the basic one that SIP provides, there will be like parallel forking, and probably every one of you is aware, like I get a request in, I have many requests going out, like I'm Daniel, I have 3 devices. If you call me, all 3 devices will ring at the same time. Or serial forking, which is more like gateway hunting. I have the cheapest route going to this provider, is busy, I want to send to the next one and next one and next one. And this is more or less like how you can do it with the default config file. I don't want to go into explaining these functions and parameters. It's just about the concept here. Documentation for this function could be found in our website. But that would be the basic of the routing in SIP. Now, that's with the native config file without getting any data from outside. You see we put next hop being 101, 102, 103 as static values in our config file. To get it dynamic, you can think of like, and I gave an example here, doing it with HTTP. query where you execute like an HTTP URL with some parameters, that HTTP client API, HTTP mylab, sip.php, and the sip.php, it's the script on the blue strip. So very simple example of how you can fetch back some SIP addresses. So instead of just having it static in the config file, as in the previous example, you fetch it via doing an HTTP query. What we get here is practically two SIP addresses. We still preserve the destination number, and we put there different IP addresses and transports. Then inside the Kamailio config file, how will that look? So that's the query with a red. Next one, it's actually parsing the result. We have so-called transformation, so that select, and we select the first one indexed by 0, and the separator is the pipe. If we look back to a previous slide, you see in the middle there in the blue is the pipe, which is the separator between two SIP addresses. And then we need to parse it in the config file. Again, this is with a native config file. Scripting language might look a bit odd, weird for some of you, but now you will have the option to do the same using Lua, Python, JavaScript, whatever you like among those. And then practically what we do here is serial forking. We have two addresses. We take the first one, we put in the request URI. The second one, we put it in what we have as a special variable XAVP. We arm a failure route, which means if the first destination is not replying, then I will try another one. And in the failure route, we use this XAVP new destination to send to it. As I said, that was more like my decision to have like pipe separated list of addresses, but then we have the RT-JSON module, which gives you a more structured and prior defined document format. And you can set all kind of attributes like request URI, next hop address, or intermediary hops if you want to send it to more than one outside. What should be the local socket for sending out, sending the caller callee addresses, and some timeouts and extra headers. So instead of just shipping back comma separated or pipe separated information, you will have to send back such a JSON. So if there is the version you want to specify, then the serial or parallel forking. Of course, if it's a single address, it's a simple try. It's not parallel or serial, but it's more or less the same. You can do it like it is. And then the routes, which is an array with a request URI, outbound proxy address, which is the DST URI, intermediary paths, local sockets from two addresses. And then it's very easy in the config file by just using this RT-JSON init routes with a variable that holds that JSON document, which is actually set by HTTP client. The green line there is setting this $var RT-MSG, which then it's used by the RT-JSON module to initialize the routes and then the push these routes in the attributes which are specific for the internal structure. And then you just have the usual serial forking with failure route, and you use this RT-JSON next route to push the next route to it and try or retry a new destination in the first option was failing. The other option, if you need more flexibility or you want a language that you are more familiar with, would be this scripting-based routing. And it's this Kemi framework. Again, we introduced it in 5.0. With a stable release, you don't have so many functions exported with it. We are now in the phase of like 2 weeks before freezing 5.1, which has more like, by now, 80% of the functions available in the native config file are also via the Kemi interface. We need to work a bit on documenting that properly because now we have different data types. It's more flexibility. So we have Lua, JavaScript, Python, and Squirrel as alternative scripting languages, which are JavaScript and Squirrel are embedded because they are small projects. Again, it's not like JavaScript from the browser. It's just the language interpreter, like how you can define function and the core of the like string operation, mathematical operation, and so on. So don't think it's something really like bloated and a huge interpreter behind it. Think about just interpreter from the structure of the language, how you define function, what operation it can do, plus, minus, so mathematical or string-based operation, arrays, the core structure for Java. Again, probably with the time, Perl and others might get updated for this. What's important now, practically, with the native config file, there are two parts, one passive, which will be the global parameters, the module parameters, and one active, which are the routing blocks. And now you need to split. The passive part is still kind of native language because you have to tell, I want to load this module and this module, set these parameters. And the active part, the routing blocks, it's what you write in these scripting languages. And surprisingly, you'll see in many slides a link to the GitHub, which has a quite large example, like what we have with native config file. You'll find it in different scripting languages, and I just got a snippet that fits in the slide. So this is what we have with native scripting language. We have this route, zip out, which the route blocks in native scripting language is more like functions that we define. And this is for sending out when the request URI is not myself, so the address in the request URI is not one on the local domain. We send to another proxy. So this is the piece, how you write it in the default scripting language. Now with Lua, which is offered by app Lua module, you can see down there what would be the same kind of logic, but done in Lua using this Kemi interface. So what we do there, we export a library or an object, KSR, standing for Kamailio SIP router, and then functions like isMyself or append header, and then we have KSR route relay. It's actually executing another route block or another function from Lua. It's no longer a route block. That's a function that you need to define. And then we have also like exit, stop the execution of this routing script. JavaScript, again, it's just the basic interpreter. It's embedded in Kamailio. You don't need anything. It's using this duck tape.org engine. It's quite used by other projects out there, so it's not the same like used by Chrome and so on. It's a separate implementation. Again, it's just implementing the language structure interpretation. Is not having the extension for web and so on. Lua and Java, you can do reload, hot reloads, and again, if you want a demo, you are available at the Kamailio booth, or tomorrow at the Dangerous demo, I will have hopefully something presented there. You can see it's more or less pretty similar, but it's just the language structure. With Lua, you have the function ended by an end word. With JavaScript, it's just the curly braces. So practically, the rest is pretty much the same. We export the same library, the same object, KSR, and then you access functions that were implemented in C inside Kamailio. Python, again, with Python is more object-oriented, and now KSR will be like an object, and it's a slightly differentiation of initializing the script. But after that, the route blocks in Kamailio are just replaced by function in Python or by functions in Lua or in JavaScript. Again, you have these links that refer to our GitHub repository. It's a larger example there, and you see the line, so it's practically just a screenshot of a piece from that one. You can get like a full routing configuration file written in all of these languages. They are now available in our examples. SQL, it's a tiny scripting languages, somehow inspired from Lua, but the guy was not really happy with the structure or the format of the language of the Lua and how loose rule Lua has, because everything is there like hash table, and the objects are referred in different ways. This was more like a playground that I wanted to do to give an example how people could add other interpreters, but it proved to be quite flexible and quite fast. And I did some tests with it, and might be a solution if you need to do some sort of embedded system or small systems, because again, it's very tiny. And again, also it supports reloading, and if you look at the down part of the slide, it looks pretty much similar like JavaScript. And I think for a couple of route blocks, I just had to copy from one to another. It's the same. Again, here you can see only function exported by KSR module, but then you can use your, like, import any library available in Python or in Lua and combine it with it. So this is just to translate what I had, like Kamailio native configuration file, and show it how it can be done in other languages. But the value would be, hey, import that library that is available in Python to connect to, I don't know, MongoDB or CouchDB that we don't have. We have MongoDB, but it was just an example. And then you combine with functions which are specific for SIB routing. The logic, you implement it natively in Python in Lua. Then sending out, relaying, and so on, you can do it in using this KSR module we exported. So we are in Expo booth 22A. You can come there for a live demo or just a chat. And before closing, if you are not familiar and you want to get a bit more in depth, we have a book which is sold only in electronic format. It's authored by me and a colleague. It's, again, only PDF. You can find it on the website. If you haven't been or not heard of our event, Kamailio World, is typically like April, May. We're gonna have the 6th edition next year. The guys at Digium were at all editions, so you'll find a lot of known faces there. It's slightly smaller. It's also very technical. A lot of engineers there, and in the city center of Berlin, organized together with the Research Institute, where everything started at a very nice location, good surroundings, so it's pretty much just city center of Berlin. You can't get better than that in Berlin. So that would be that I wanted to highlight. It's more just like a drop to increase or to open the interest on what you can do now. So you have full flexibility. If you don't want to stick to the native config file, that some people find it a bit hard to learn, or maybe it's not that well documented, you can either go to the APIs, or you can use your preferred scripting language. Hopefully it's already supported, or if not, should be easy to add it, and we can assist you to do that. So thank you, and for the questions, I have some cookies, which probably I don't get so many questions. I have only 3 now. Fred has more. We have even more at the booth. And for the most interesting session, should be done by someone of size European, size L. I have a Kamailio t-shirt to give away.
So bribery, cookies for questions, and a t-shirt as well.
So any question has a cookie, then the most interesting question has, as an extra, has the t-shirt.
So any questions?
One in the back, in your back. In your back.
Wait, what, behind me? Behind me!
Since Kamailio is a quite complicated engine, and it's probably a bit difficult to kind of build your ecosystem from starting, is there any kind of like downloadable examples that just say, hey, I want to get going, here's like a normal minimum sort of setup?
Yeah, the default config file is actually pretty like VoIP platform that you can use out of the box with doing authentication. You have to enable some things there, but then we have also examples with like redirect, with like Kami examples, as here scripting languages, but the default one is like a full-featured VoIP platform without media handling, just direct calling, but still with authentication, not traversal, even presence. Other questions? So a cookie for you? So far?
Are they gluten-free?
It's... It's baked by Fred, which has a talk had to leave because has a talk next to me. But I can give you more examples. Sorry.
You mentioned the alternative
Oh.
scripting interpreters. For C#, what's your vision? How long do you think that
So
will be?
I was the developer of that module, and since then I haven't done much with it. There are some companies using it because they had some library connecting to some Microsoft system. It was typically to fetch like username, password, and some attributes for the user profile. But I haven't seen much activity. So to my knowledge, at least like 3 companies are using it. Doesn't have the Kemi support on it because I haven't seen it as a priority. I'm not much like a Windows developer. I like programming languages because it's what I studied. I was studying software programming, and I was specialized in database, compilers, and network communication at it was at our university.
So there is an implementation
There is-
out there now.
There is an implementation, but you can't really write. It's like inline execution. Inside the native config file, you say execute from that script, but it's Kamailio is the interpreter. It's not an external program.
Right, that's what
Alistair?
Do you have any plans to allow modules in other compiled languages other than C, perhaps Go?
At this moment, not on my radar. I'm, again, a lot in programming languages. I like them, and I like playing with them, like Golang I was looking, or Rust. But for this was not something that I consider seriously so far. And maybe last question, because I think it's time to switch.
The scripting using C#.NET, Kamailio runs on you on a Linux platform. How do you do this?
There is this project called Mono. Mono, that is the interpreter. As far as I understood, Microsoft released something for Linux already.
Yeah, it supports about 3/4 of the framework.
Okay, but again, it's more like inline execution. Is not writing everything in C#. It's
If we contact you, would you lead us along the path to another company that's using that implementation, maybe that we share?
probably sometimes it's better to just ask on user mailing list, hey, is anyone using it? And I mean, I wrote the module, I could give you some hints on user mailing list, but I'm not using it in production myself. So I know someone did it and they contacted me, but otherwise I don't have experience with it. I coded it at some point because I found it a bit interesting, but otherwise I'm pretty much with native, and when I can't do native config file, I'm more like Lua guy.
Right, well, I think we're about out of time, but
So then
who gets the T-shirt?
I'll give it to you. You are the first one, the most courageous. But then I will take this because you are not happy, and I will give it to the last one that asks questions. No, actually, I have many.
No,
You'll come and I'll give you a cookie.
Right, we're out of time. We need to, those people who need to get away quickly.
Okay,
And
thank you anyhow. And
thank
again,
you, Daniel.